In this video, I will show you how I sketch cherry blossoms in pencil and watercolor in a very loose style. And I'm starting here with the approximation of the leaves. So I'm putting down those loose strokes to get a better grasp of the outlines and the rough layout of the leaf structure. So I'm taking my time to closely observe, and I'm keeping my lines light, and at some point I jump in and commit to some bolder lines, like for those hanging blossoms here. And I try to think about those blossoms as discs that point into a direction. So I try to imagine how they work out spatially. So I draw these circles in different perspectives that indicate the round form of the blossom. And by visualizing how these volumes sit in space and can be translated onto the page, I can convey a better sense of perspective and of three-dimensionality of those blossoms. And it might seem insignificant because, you know, these are organic forms. These are not houses or streets where I would need to keep a certain perspective to make them work at all. But it definitely makes a difference, and it's a good practice to do this even for these kind of subjects. So it really helps. And I'm fleshing out the leaves more, adding these small serrations at the edges of the leaves, which also helps define them and show what species this is. So bit by bit, I'm observing and exploring the entire cherry twig here. And maybe one word about the pencil. So this is a mechanical pencil with an 0.7 lead. And I've chosen this here. So this is actually a bit broader than what I usually draw with. I usually use an 0.5. And I've chosen this here because I wanted the sketch to be really loose. This broader lead allows me to make these really sort of bold lines and loose strokes while still allowing for some kind of precision. So as I've probably said before, I really love these mechanical pencils. I don't have to sharpen them. They're just ready to go at any point. And now I'm starting to observe a bit closer how these petals actually overlap. So my circle, my loose line circle helps me a bit with this to keep inside of the shape, and I can just do those very loose pencil lines here. And often with these overlapping elements, it can be helpful to work from the front to the back, so that you draw in the elements in the front first and then gradually add those that are in the back. And this way you don't have to erase that much. You will simply forego those lines that are in the back and that you can't really see. But in the planning stage, it's really fine to do all these loose shapes and overlap them. This is usually no problem. Yeah, and here you can see how I'm doing this round motion again, how I'm trying to complete the circle and fit the flower into the circle. And I'm doing this for all of the flowers that I want to add to this sketch. So this one is seen a bit more from the front. This makes it easier for me to draw. I can also see more of the insides of the flower. So this is also a lot of fun to draw and to add. Lots of details. I also try to be mindful about the line quality in this sketch, so bolder lines in the front, more delicate lines in the back, and where I can see the form is maybe influenced by light or is very, very delicate, like in these blossoms here. So this is also a good strategy to keep in mind for your sketches. So with my pencil sketch finished, I can switch to watercolor, and the first thing I'll do is mix some greens for the leaves. And I want to have a yellowish light green. And I'm doing this by mixing sap green and my Winsor yellow to get this kind of nice spring green for the fresh cherry leaves that I have. And then I start to apply it with sort of a middle-sized brush, maybe a size 4 brush. And I try to stay within my pencil line so that it doesn't look too sloppy, you know, loose but not sloppy and still precise up to a point. And I'm already trying to see which leaves are in the back, which are maybe a bit darker and in shadow. And as long as the paint is in a wet wash, the colors blend nicely into each other. So I can lay down this thin layer, this first thin layer. And another thing I try to do here is leave a few white areas in my wash, so I don't just fill up the entire outline or the inside of the outline with paint, but I try to leave areas white or lighter where I can see the sunlight is maybe hitting that leaf or where there needs to be a highlight. And then I go in here with this sort of muted orange, which has a bit of yellow ochre in it. And this is for these tips, for these just freshly unfolded leaves of the cherry. So very interesting color that you don't see so often in leaves. Obviously the stems are also of this light green and the middle of the blossom too. And as I progress, I adjust my green mix a bit. So these leaves are slightly darker, they're in shadow. So I've added a little bit of cobalt blue to the mix. And I just try to keep everything really loose, really playful. Don't want to overwork these. And as the first layer has dried, I can go back in with slightly more intense color. So I've adjusted the dilution of the paint. I've added a bit more pigment and also darker pigment. So again, I use the sap green and maybe just a little bit less yellow. And then I can go in and sort of structure the leaves a little bit and show the veins and show interesting areas, maybe where there's a shadow or where there's an edge that I want to pick out. And I'm jumping back and forth between the different areas of my sketch, adjusting it as I compare it with the reference here. So, and again, I'm taking my time for this. Just because it's loose doesn't mean you have to be quick or sloppy in your application of paint. So it just means that you can be a bit more mindful about how you apply your paint and how you use the brush. I've switched to the dark red areas of the blossoms, and this is mixed from Perylene Violet on my palette and a tiny bit of Quinacridone Rose. So I like the contrast of the cherry blossoms, of this base that has this dark red tone and then the light pink of the blossoms, and I want to make sure that this will really pop out in the sketch. And again, I'm adding this color everywhere in my sketch where I can see it, almost sort of like a paint by numbers. But yeah, like sketching and painting is always observing and then readjusting what you've painted and observing again, and sort of this back and forth. It's an ongoing process, and sometimes you go a little too far in one direction and then you have to adjust your painting again. So the stem here also has this Perylene Violet color, and after letting everything dry, I'm now ready to mix the pink color for the blossoms. So I'm just using Quinacridone Rose with a lot of water to make it nice and soft. And I often do my sketches this way, at least botanical sketches, where I sort of paint my way through the entire flower and leave the most exciting part for me to last. And in this case, this is the spectacular pink color of the blossoms. So I'm really enjoying doing this. And again, I try to leave some areas white. I don't just fill out the entire blossom with paint, but I try to leave highlights and lighter areas and also add darker areas like those unopened blossoms here that have this sort of darker pink color. And so I add a less diluted wash here with more intense pink pigment. Yeah, again, I'm working my way through the entire twig with a very loose diluted wash. and plenty of white space. And in some of the areas that are a bit darker, I drop in paint that spreads around nice and loosely. And in other areas that are already dry, I add a second darker layer to show the edges and the overlap of the petals a bit better. And also the darker areas where I add more contrast by adding the darker paint. And I define the edges of the buds a bit more. And overall the sketch is taking really nice shape. It's looking three-dimensional. It looks like light and dark areas are well defined. And I almost wish I had stopped at that point, because now I'm going in to define a few more shadows. You've just seen me mix a shadow color with cobalt blue and a middle red. And now I'm applying this to the areas where I can see a shadow. And somehow looking back on this and seeing the result later, I'm not entirely convinced this was the right thing to do. Maybe it was just the color of the shadow, or maybe the entire decision to add a shadow, but I don't really like it as much as the contrasty, vibrant version that I had here in this stage. But I'm still showing this to you because I want to teach you that sometimes we make these mistakes, and there's always the potential that you can learn from this and adapt for the next painting that you do. And so I don't think this is a fail sketch or anything, but I know now that I have to be a bit careful with these kind of shadows for very delicate flowers. So another thing that I add with this almost opaque yellow here are the middle parts of the flowers, the stamen, which is bright yellow. So I redefine this in all parts of the flowers where I can see it. And I also add a bit more opacity with this jaune brillant to redefine those inner parts, those very delicate parts of the flower. And after that has dried, I add a bit more contrast with more dark parts. So again, it's a constant juggle to adjust the contrasts of a painting and the value structure by comparing it and observing again and again how these different values play together. So also for those dark red parts, I still add another layer and adjust a few areas. And of particular interest are these sort of shadowy creases in the flowers themselves, where I can sort of see into the creases of the petals. And the last step I take is I redefine my pencil lines a bit more and restate some of those interesting dynamic lines that the leaves and the blossoms are taking. Yeah, and this is the finished sketch. I hope you've enjoyed this and this was useful to see. And if you want to learn more about botanical sketching and the kind of techniques that I showed here, then have a look around my channel. I have more videos like this. Or you could join the course that I've put together, which is called Introduction to Botanical Sketching. And this covers everything from the basics of drawing different shapes of flowers to mixing great botanical colors, then adding color to your sketches, also adding shadows or texture, some practical tips for field sketching, and much, much more. And you can either go through this course on your own in self-study mode, or for the first time this year I will offer it as a 4-week live version where you can get assignments and live feedback from me. So if that sounds interesting, give it a look. I would love to have you in the course. And in any case, thank you so much for watching, for staying until the end, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.